Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu.
And may the peace, mercy, and blessings of Allah be upon you. Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are really undertaking a critical mission. We're delving into a concept that's foundational to the Islamic marriage contract, but it's also, maybe one of the most culturally misunderstood and legally challenged aspects of Muslim life globally.
We're talking about Mahr, the obligatory dower.
Exactly.
And Mahr is so fascinating because when outsiders look at it, they often dismiss it. They think it's just some historical artifact, or even worse, they equate it with that awful pre-Islamic idea of a bride price.
Yes, like a transaction.
A transaction where the woman is essentially purchased from her family.
Precisely. And our goal today is to show how the Quran didn't just tweak that custom, it fundamentally revolutionized it. We want to reveal how Mahr was really, in its essence, an ontological shift.
Okay, ontological, that's a heavy term. What does that mean in practical terms for a bride back in the 7th century?
Well, it means she gained the right to capital. It took the payment away from the guardian, from her father or uncle, and it turned it into the sole inalienable property of the woman herself.
So it went directly to her.
Directly to her.
Yeah.
And that single act instantaneously elevated her legal standing. She went from being an object in a transaction to a free, independent party to the marriage contract. Her economic autonomy was established from that moment.
So she becomes the guaranteed sole legal owner of that capital. The contract literally cannot proceed without this financial right being established for her.
That's the shift. It defined her economic status, her honor, everything.
And today we're synthesizing a lot of deep Sunni scholarship. We're covering the foundational Quranic mandates, the precise prophetic precedents, which range from, a heap of gold all the way down to an iron ring.
Right.
And then the intricate rulings of the 4 major schools, the Hanafi, Maliki, Shafi'i, and Hanbali schools.
And then we have to confront the 21st century realities. We're seeing high-value cryptocurrency Mahrs, intellectual property assets, and then all the confusing legal battles Mahr faces in secular Western courts.
It's a journey across theology, law, economics, and culture.
It is. So we have to start right at the beginning, establishing Mahr as this financial right and religious obligation.
Okay, let's do it. Let's unpack this with the divine mandate. We have to go straight to the definitive command in the Quran, which is in Surah An-Nisa, chapter 4, verse 4. You called it the Magna Carta of women's financial rights. What does that verse actually command?
It commands. And give the women upon marriage their bridal gifts graciously. The entire theological weight of Mahr is, it's all contained right there. In the ownership and in the attitude, it is explicitly the sole property of the bride.
And there's a key word in that verse that the jurists always focus on. It's Nihlah, right? Why is that word so important?
The term Nihlah is derived from the root Nile, which means to give efficiently, spontaneously, freely, like a selfless gift. The great scholar Al-Tabari, in his exegesis, he really unpacks this. He says, Mahr is a farida, a religious obligation from Allah, so you must pay it.
No choice.
No choice. But it has to be delivered with the spirit of a nihlah, a gift. This nuance is what stops it from being a commercial transaction. It's a token of her honor and dignity, not a price for conjugal rights.
That's a profound distinction. It's not a purchase. It moves it completely out of that realm of, chattel acquisition and into the realm of honor and financial provision.
Exactly. And the command to give the women themselves just completely crushed the previous social order.
The pre-Islamic Jahiliyyah period.
Absolutely. You have to understand the backdrops. There were all these noxious forms of marriage. The most common problem was that the wealth went to the guardian, never the bride. For instance, you had shigar marriage, where 2 men would just exchange their daughters, like a trade. A literal trade. I'll marry my daughter to you if you marry your daughter to me, and no dowry is paid to either of them.
The woman was just the collateral.
Just the object being exchanged.
Precisely. So the Quranic mandate, give the women, it instantly severed the guardian's legal and financial claim to that wealth. It ensured the capital went directly to the person entering the contract. This wealth was hers to keep, to invest, to spend, even if she was still living under her father's roof. This is the bedrock of her financial independence.
So she's confirmed as the immediate independent owner, but what happens in those difficult cases, a divorce where the contract is signed but the marriage isn't completed, The sources point us to Surah al-Baqarah, verses 236 and 237.
Right. These verses clarify the rules for the unfinished contract, and they lay out the two main ways Mahr is specified. First, you have Mahr al-Musamma, which is the specified dower. That's the easy case where an amount was clearly agreed upon.
And the second? The second is the more complicated case of an unspecified Mahr, often called tafed. This is where a couple gets married without naming an amount, trusting they'll figure it out later.
Let's focus on that first scenario. Divorce before consummation, before the couple has touched, as the Quran puts it. What happens with this specified Mahr?
If the Mahr was specified, verse 2.237 is crystal clear. Only half of the specified amount is due.
Only half.
And this is a critical legal insight. It proves that the woman's right to Mahr is not conditional on consummation. It crystallizes the second the nikah contract is signed. So a divorce before consummation still means she is entitled to 50% of what was promised. It compensates her for entering the contract and, frankly, protects her reputation.
That's a fascinating provision. It protects her legal status immediately. But what about the other case, the Tafwid case, where they married without specifying any amount at all?
In that situation, according to verse 2.236, no Mahr is strictly due. However, the husband is mandatorily required to provide a muta.
And a muta is a gift.
It's a consolatory gift. It's meant to provide comfort and financial relief to the wife after the marriage ends, to ensure she's not left destitute or feeling dishonored.
And what's really interesting is that the verse connects this obligation directly to the husband's ability to pay. It establishes a standard of equity.
Exactly. The verse commands the muta must be paid according to his means, the wealthy according to his capability, and the poor according to his capability. This introduces a deep principle into financial law. It prevents a rich man from giving some trivial, insulting token, and it also stops a poor man from being legally ruined by an unrealistic demand. It's financial justice rooted in reality.
That focus on means is so crucial for fairness. Now, let's look at a classical juristic extension of the term touching. This is a really technical nuance, particularly from the Hanafi school, that significantly expands when the full Mahr becomes due.
This is a real deep dive detail. It's the concept of kalwa sahiha, or valid seclusion. The Hanafi school, which is followed by, a huge portion of the Muslim world, they ruled that the full Mahr becomes due not just upon confirmed physical intercourse,
Right.
but also if the couple was secluded alone together in a private setting where intimacy was legal and physically possible, and there were no barriers.
Why introduce that legal expansion? I mean, why not just stick to the physical act itself? Isn't that sort of a human legal invention being applied to a divine right?
That's a fair challenge. The jurists introduced it based on the Maqasid al-Sharia, the higher objectives of the law, and the primary objective here is the protection of dignity, hifz al-urd, and preventing scandal. If a woman is secluded with a man, her reputation in the community is affected, even if nothing happened. So the law steps in to protect her rights immediately.
So it's like a shield. It removes the need to prove the intimate details of their relationship in court, which would be, well, degrading and scandalous.
Precisely. If the husband initiates that seclusion, he accepts the risk and the responsibility. The full Mahr becomes due because the potential for damage to her reputation has been realized, and the law protects her financial right as a result. It ensures justice and prevents this moral intrusion into their private lives.
Going back to Surah 4.4, the Magna Carta, there's a clause in there that allows the wife to remit or forgive the Mahr. But the jurists put incredibly tight restrictions on this, don't they, to make sure it doesn't become another way to exploit her.
This is where we revisit that crucial condition, if they give up willingly, Ibn Afsan. Jurists like the great Maliki scholar al-Qurtubi, they emphasize that this requires the woman to be of sound mind and absolutely free from any form of coercion, pressure, or emotional blackmail.
So if a husband is pressuring his wife, maybe saying she's not pious if she claims her Mahr, or threatening to withhold affection, that forgiveness is void.
Absolutely. The sources are unified on this. If a husband uses harassment, duress, or even intense emotional pressure to coerce her into forfeiting her Mahr, that revision is legally void. It ensures the Mahr remains a protected, inalienable asset. The verse even continues with the phrase "haheni and marian," meaning with satisfaction and ease, which just underscores that only when the remission is truly free and willing can the husband lawfully benefit from it.
That's incredible depth. It links the financial right to true, uncoerced consent. It confirms Mahr isn't just about money. It's about her dignity and her economic autonomy from day one.
Which brings us to the very practical questions of value and moderation. If the ceiling is limitless, then what's the recommended amount?
Okay, let's get into the how much. And let's start with the upper limit, or really the lack of one. We go back to the Quran, Surah Nisa, verse 4.20, which is definitive proof that there's no maximum cap on Mahr.
The verse is discussing replacing one wife with another, and it says that if you do, you can't take back any of the Mahr you gave her, even if you had given one of them a kintar.
A kintar.
A kintar. It's this colossal indefinite term. It's translated as a heap of gold or a talent. The use of that specific word proves the legal capacity for an absolutely astronomical dower.
So the Quran is deliberately using hyperbole, a heap of gold, to cement the idea that this wealth, once it's transferred, is completely and irrevocably hers, no matter the size.
Precisely. The amount is designed to be potentially astronomical and legally untouchable. The implication is profound. It enshrines her right to potentially claim an enormous sum, underscoring her dignity and the seriousness of the contract.
And this principle of an infinite ceiling is famously reinforced by that story of Caliph Umar ibn al-Khattab. This story has huge significance, right?
It's one of the most important precedents in Islamic governance. Caliph Umar, during his rule, he noticed that dowries were escalating. They were getting out of control, creating barriers to marriage. It was kind of a spinsterhood crisis of his time.
So he decided to act. He used his authority as caliph to try and impose a cap.
He tried. He stood in the mosque and announced a legislative cap on Mahrs. And what happened next is just amazing. A woman in the congregation stood up and publicly challenged the caliph.
In public?
In public. She cited this very verse, 4.20, the Kintar verse, and she argued, how can you limit what Allah has made limitless? She used the Quran to overturn state policy. And Umar, being who he was, famously retracted his policy on the spot. And he said, the woman is right and Umar is wrong.
Wow. That moment is just an incredible reinforcement that Mahr is a divine right. No state, no ruler, not even the most powerful caliph can abrogate or limit it.
And while the legal ceiling is infinite, this brings us to the other side of the coin, the concept of Mahr al-Sunnah, the prophetic benchmark for moderation.
So what was the specific amount given by the Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, to his wives? This sets the standard for affordability.
The consensus, which comes from a narration from Aisha, is 500 dirhams of silver. And she even specified the calculation, 12 uqiyah and a nash, where a nash is half an uqiyah. It works out to exactly 500 dirhams.
Let's ground that figure in today's money, because 500 dirhams is the standard most scholars refer to when they talk about moderation.
Well, if we convert that, 500 dirhams is roughly 1,487 to 1,530 grams of pure silver. At today's silver prices, which, they fluctuate,
Of course.
we are talking about a value that's typically in the range of, say, $1,200 and $1,600 US dollars. It's a substantial amount. It's meaningful capital for her, but it's affordable enough for the vast majority of men. It fulfills that standard of being neither trivial nor extravagant.
And we also have this specific example of Lady Fatima's marriage to Ali ibn Abi Talib, which shows how Mahr was acquired and used by couples who didn't have a lot of cash on hand.
The dower of Fatima, or Mahr al-Fatimi, is critical because it addresses that scarcity of cash. Ali was a great warrior, but a man of few means. He had almost no liquid assets when he proposed. So the Prophet asked him, what do you have? And Ali listed his sword, his camel, and his armor, his dear Hudamiyah.
And that armor was his strategic asset. That was his tool of trade, of protection. He was asked to liquidate his career capital for the marriage.
It was a sacrificial act. It just underscores the seriousness of the Mahr obligation. Ali sold the armor for about 480 to 500 dirhams, and the significance is twofold. First, Mahr can be generated from liquidating personal property, not just savings. And second, those funds were immediately used under the Prophet's instruction to buy necessities for the new home: bedding, perfume, a water skin.
So the Mahr functioned as the immediate seed capital for the new home, and while it legally remained her property, it financed the start of their life together. That's a huge contrast to many cultural expectations today, where the bride's family is pressured to pay for everything.
It sets the expectation that the husband provides the seed capital for the home through the dower, cementing his role as the financial provider, while the capital remains his wife's legal property.
Now we have to move to the absolute minimalist standard, the famous Hadith of the Iron Ring. This is really the cornerstone for the whole juristic debate on the absolute minimum acceptable Mahr.
This narration from Bukhari is just pivotal. It's cited in courtrooms today. A destitute woman offered herself in marriage to the Prophet, peace be upon him. A man expressed interest, but when the Prophet asked what he had to give as Mahr, the man could find nothing. The Prophets told him, Go and search, even if it is an iron ring.
Okay, iron ring.
And the man came back empty-handed. He couldn't even find an item with negligible monetary value.
So how did the contract proceed?
The Prophet then asked him if he knew any of the Quran. The man listed several surahs he had memorized, and the Prophet concluded the marriage contract by saying, I have married her to you for what you know of the Quran. Bima aka min al-Quran.
That single narration has just massive juristic weight. It proves that value doesn't have to be monetary.
It is the definitive proof text for the Shafi'i and Hanbali schools that there is no minimum monetary limit for Mahr. Any service, in this case teaching the Quran, or any object of value, however small, what they call mutamawal, anything that can be legally owned and traded is valid as long as the woman agrees.
And if we want to take the non-material aspect even further, we have that unique, really inspiring example of Sulam, where the dower was entirely spiritual.
The story of Sulam and Abu Talha was one of a kind. Abu Talha was a wealthy polytheist, and he proposed to her. And Sulam rejected his wealth based solely on his religion. She said, a man like you is not to be rejected, but you are a disbeliever, and I am a Muslim.
So what was her condition for the marriage?
She said, if you become Muslim, that will be my Mahr, and I will not ask you for anything else. And he converted. The narrator of the story famously said, I have never heard of a woman whose dowry was more noble than Sulam, Islam.
Wow.
It proves that Mahr can be a moral or spiritual deed. She voluntarily waived her financial right in exchange for the spiritual merit of his conversion, which fulfilled the contractual obligation.
That establishes such a powerful ethos. The intent is to grant an honorable, protected right, whether that right is a kintar of gold, a service, or a conversion. But this leads us to the technical, legal differences between the schools.
Indeed. Which brings us to Section 3. Classical jurisprudence and permissible assets, where we see how the four Sunni schools took these foundational texts and built their detailed legal frameworks, especially around minimums.
So the Shafi'i and Hanbali schools take the iron ring hadith to mean no minimum, but the Hanafi and Maliki schools, they derived specific monetary minimums through this juristic analogy, qiyas. Let's spend a minute on the Hanafi school's reasoning for their 10 dirham minimum. It's fascinating.
It is. The Hanafi school requires a minimum Mahr of 10 dirhams, which is about 30 or 31 grams of silver. So today, maybe 25 to 30 US dollars. The qiyas, the analogy they use, is a really interesting piece of juristic logic. They made an analogy to the nisab for theft.
The nisab for theft, you mean the minimum threshold for the had punishment, the cutting of the hand.
That's the one. Their argument was that the value associated with the sanctity of the marital bond and intimacy should not be less than the amount for which a hand is cut off in Islamic penal law.
That sounds incredibly severe.
It is, but it's a deliberate connection. They're linking the irreversible establishment of the marital tie to a very high legal benchmark for serious financial loss. By doing this, they solidify its position as a serious financial obligation and ensure the transaction always has real, tangible, non-trivial value.
That intellectual reasoning is really something. The Maliki school also set a minimum, but it was a bit lower, at 3 dirhams.
Yes, the Maliki reasoning followed a similar logic, also rooted in the theft threshold, but they used a different set of narrations about the exchange rates between gold dinars and silver dirhams at the time to establish their threshold. But the core idea is the same for both schools. They insist on a baseline monetary value.
So to sum up the rulings, Hanafi at 10 dirhams, Maliki at 3, while Shafi'i and Hanbali accept anything of value.
Correct. And despite the difference in minimums, the consensus is that Mahr must be specified and it must possess legal value, or mal.
Now let's talk about how this specified dower, the Mahr al-Musama, is actually paid. This often causes confusion. It's structured into 2 parts, prompt and deferred.
And this structure is key to its function as a financial safeguard. Muajjal is the prompt portion. This is payable immediately when the contract is signed, or upon demand by the wife shortly after. This part is crucial. It's meant to give her immediate financial security and capital in the marriage.
And mu'akhar is the deferred part. This is the financial safety net, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Mu'akhar is the delayed debt. It only becomes immediately payable upon the death of the husband or upon divorce. So it serves a dual purpose. First, it's a financial deterrent against an easy, arbitrary divorce by the husband because he knows a significant debt will be triggered.
Right.
And second, it guarantees the wife financial security if the marriage does end, ensuring she's not left destitute as she starts her next phase of life.
Now, what about that crucial fallback mechanism, Mahr al-Mithal, the fair dower? When does this complicated calculation become necessary?
Mahr al-Mithal becomes the default in 2 main scenarios. First, if the specified Mahr was void, For example, the husband listed an illegal haram item as the dower. The marriage is still valid, but the financial agreement is voided.
And the second.
Second is if the couple consummates the marriage, having agreed to that unspecified Tafwid arrangement we mentioned earlier.
So how is this fair dower calculated? It can't be arbitrary.
No, it's extremely standardized and legally specific. It's calculated by looking at the Mahrs received by female relatives on the wife's father's side, so her sisters, her paternal aunts, her cousins, who share similar characteristics to her.
Why the paternal side specifically?
The focus on the paternal lineage is to preserve social consistency and equity within her established family and clan status. The court compares variables like social status, age, education, her virginity status, family wealth, even general beauty. This ensures the Mahr is proportionate to her standing and removes subjectivity.
That level of detail is just. It shows the complexity embedded in the law to cover every contingency. Now, let's talk about the evolving definition of wealth, or mal. The sources show this huge shift from traditional commodities to modern financial tools.
The underlying rule is constant. Any commodity or service that is mal, wealth, halal, lawful, and known specified, can be Mahr. We started with gold, silver, land, livestock. But today, the definition of mal has necessarily expanded.
This is where it gets really interesting for today's world. What kind of modern, intangible assets are jurists accepting as valid Mahr?
Well, intellectual property is now widely accepted as huquq maliyah, or financial rights. So copyrights, patents, royalties from a successful book, even ownership stakes in a business, those are all valid.
What about education?
Yes, paying for a wife's university, master's, or PhD tuition fees is recognized as a valid high-value benefit, or manfor.
Yeah.
This recognizes the immense future economic value of education.
That's a powerful modern application. What about assets with inherent volatility like stocks or, the elephant in the room, cryptocurrency?
Stocks and equities are generally accepted with the non-negotiable condition that the company's activities must be Sharia compliant. Cryptocurrency. That is a heavily debated area.
I can imagine.
The central debate is whether it's true mal or wealth. Some jurists accept it as a digital asset, which would make it valid. Others view it as too speculative, too volatile, too unregulated. They see it as bordering on qimar, or gambling, which would render the Mahr void.
But what if a couple agrees on it? Let's say one Bitcoin as the deferred Mahr. Is that contractually binding?
If they agree, and the local religious authority accepts it as mal, then yes, it becomes a binding debt denominated in that asset. If the price triples before a divorce, the husband is legally bound to provide that one Bitcoin. That volatility is part of the accepted risk.
That clarifies the digital frontier. You also mentioned services like Hajj or Umrah packages being used. How does the law handle a spiritual gift that's also a debt?
It's permissible, but jurists advise specifying a clear monetary value for the service. So, for example, $7,000 for a premium Hajj package. The reason is debt quantification. If the husband dies before the pilgrimage is fulfilled, the Mahr has to be paid from his estate, and the estate needs a clear monetary value to settle the debt against the inheritors.
That legal mechanism is crucial, even for a spiritual gift. And finally, let's talk about the strange boundary cases, like the cat controversy you hinted at. Can a pet be Mahr?
This is where we see the difference between strict law and custom. In the Shafi'i and Hanbali schools, with no minimum, if an animal has recognized monetary value, a prize-winning purebred horse, for instance, or, yes, even a rare, expensive cat, and it's permissible to trade it, it is technically valid Mahr.
So you might laugh, but if you have a prize-winning Siamese cat worth $10,000, that's legally more viable than an unspecified plot of land.
Exactly. Though scholars strongly discourage using trivial or strange items to maintain the solemnity of the contract, the underlying principle is, if it's legally tradable and has value, mutual, it's valid.
And what definitively invalidates the specified Mahr, triggering that Mahr al-Mithla fallback?
Two things. First, haram substances, alcohol, pork, illicit financial instruments. If those are listed, the marriage is valid, but the Mahr specification is void. Second is gharar, or uncertainty. You have to be precise. If a husband promises, I will give you a car, without specifying the make, model, year, or condition, that ambiguity voids the specified Mahr because the debt can't be quantified. Clarity is paramount.
This detailed analysis of the divine intent and the classical legal mechanisms really sets the stage for the stark global reality we face today. Mahr has become a source of so much conflict and distortion.
Right. And now we have to turn to Section 4. the global disconnect, and examine how this religious law clashes with culture and secular legal systems today.
Let's start with the Gulf Cooperation Council, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Qatar, where Mahr has gone from being a financial right to being a massive economic barrier because of hyperinflation.
This is a classic example of cultural status just completely overtaking legal intent. It's driven by cultural competition, the desire for prestige, and just general oil wealth. Mahrs have skyrocketed. Standard Mahrs are often $20,000 to $100,000 and sometimes far higher.
So is it fair to say that the Quran's permission for a kintar is now being culturally abused to create these status barriers, which contradicts the Prophet's whole ethos of ease?
That is a very apt observation. The legal capacity for a high Mahr exists, but cultural pressure has weaponized it, and the consequence is severe. The spinsterhood crisis. The high costs have significantly delayed the marriage age for men, which has led to large numbers of unmarried women past the traditionally accepted ages.
And governments have tried to intervene, haven't they?
Yes. Governments like the UAE have tried to impose official caps, and they've established massive marriage funds to subsidize the costs for men. But cultural expectations often just override the law. Families will record the low legal cap on paper, but maintain a separate high customary amount that's demanded privately, so the intended financial protection becomes a huge social and economic hurdle.
Moving west to Egypt, the Mahr concept has morphed into this unique legal instrument called al-Qaima, the list, which, despite good intentions, has created this massive legal trap.
The Qaima system came out of necessity. Because of high inflation and economic hardship in Egypt, grooms often couldn't afford a huge cash Mahr. So the tradition evolved. The bride's family, needing to furnish the home, buys the furniture and appliances. The groom then signs al-Qaima, a meticulous inventory listing every single item from the fridge down to the cutlery, and he acknowledges that he received them not as his property, but as a legal trust, an amanah.
So the groom becomes the trustee of items purchased by the bride's family.
Exactly. And here's the trap and the tragic weaponization. If the marriage ends, and the husband fails to return every single item on that list, which is almost impossible after years of use, he faces criminal prosecution and potential imprisonment for breach of trust.
So it becomes a criminal matter, not a civil one.
Yes, the system transforms what should be a financial guarantee into a criminal debt, leading to thousands of men being incarcerated every year over property disputes that are disguised as criminal breaches of trust.
That's a shocking outcome. It completely perverts the original intent. And we also see social status dictating Mahr in places like Jordan and Palestine.
Research there shows a clear, quantifiable link between a bride's education and her Mahr demands. A university degree, or a PhD, is a sign of high social status, which directly translates into higher Mahr expectations from her family.
Now we have to shift drastically to South Asia, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, where the sources describe a tragic inversion of Islamic law known as the Jahez, or dowry crisis.
This is, I would argue, the most egregious distortion. The practice of Jahez, which is the Hindu-influenced custom where the bride's family pays wealth to the groom, has tragically permeated Muslim culture across South Asia.
So instead of the groom providing Mahr to the bride's family is pressured to pay the groom's family. The law is literally inverted.
Completely inverted. The authentic Mahr is reduced to some nominal fossilized amount. They often call it Shari Mahr, maybe 32 rupees, or a similarly trivial figure, just to fulfill the religious formality. Meanwhile, the groom's family demands exorbitant Jahez cars, property, gold, lavish weddings, placing immense financial strain on the bride's parents. And this reversal leads directly to horrific social evils, including domestic violence and dowry deaths.
Despite this overwhelming cultural pressure, how have countries like Pakistan legally tried to reinforce the authentic Mahr obligation?
They've used powerful secular mechanisms. Pakistani judgments treat the deferred Mahr as arrears of land revenue. This is a critical legal maneuver because it lets the state use its full coercive machinery, including seizing and liquidating the husband's property, to ensure the Mahr is paid upon divorce.
That's a fascinating legal pushback, using the state's power to combat that cultural erosion. Finally, let's analyze the challenge Mahr faces in secular Western jurisdictions, the U.S. and Europe, where Muslim couples often deal with what they call limping marriages.
The problem in the West is the conflict of laws. In the U.S., the main obstacle is the First Amendment's Establishment Clause, the separation of church and state. So the courts are deeply divided on whether enforcing Mahr constitutes prohibited entanglement with religious doctrine.
So where does the law typically enforce Mahr in the U.S.?
In states like New York and New Jersey, courts tend to apply secular contract law. If the Mahr agreement meets the standards of a civil contract, clear offer, acceptance, and consideration, they treat it as a contractual debt. The landmark case Aziz v. Aziz confirmed this. The agreement was enforceable as a private contractual agreement, separate from its religious roots.
But the refusal argument, that relies on the religious nature of the contract. So where is Mahr typically rejected?
In states like California and Michigan, here, courts often refuse enforcement under the Establishment Clause. The case of in remarriage of turf demonstrates this reasoning. The court argued that to interpret the meaning and validity of Mahr requires prohibited entanglement with religious doctrine. The court said it couldn't determine if the contract was void without entering a religious judgment, which is prohibited.
So what's the crucial practical advice for Muslims in the U.S. to protect this right, given this judicial divide?
The practical advice is clear. Draft a comprehensive civil prenuptial agreement that clearly mirrors the Mahr terms, the exact dollar amount, the payment schedule, the conditions of deferral, and sign it in accordance with secular contract law. Relying solely on the religious nikah certificate is a significant judicial risk.
And in the UK, they have Sharia councils, but their rulings on Mahr aren't legally binding in English courts. What's the strategy there?
The standard strategy is to treat Mahr as a financial debt, separate from family law. So women sue for the Mahr in county courts as a simple breach of contract claim. This divorces the financial obligation from the complex religious entanglement, treating it purely as a contractual debt enforceable under common law.
That's a highly pragmatic solution. What about continental Europe, particularly Germany and France?
In Germany, the federal court often applies private international law, using the law of the couple's nationality. So if a Turkish or Moroccan couple divorces in Germany, the court might apply their home country's law regarding Mahr, provided the amount isn't punitively high or violates German public order.
And France, given its very strict approach to laïcité or secularism.
France is the highest hurdle. Mahr is frequently ignored in divorce settlements unless it's meticulously integrated into a standard civil contract. And even then, due to historical anxieties, French authorities sometimes view high Mahr demands suspiciously, potentially seeing them as a sign of coercion or a forced purchase. The secular system really struggles to categorize Mahr accurately as a debt rather than a religious imposition.
We've synthesized so much today, the incredible breadth of Mahr. It started as this radical revolutionary act of female financial empowerment, shifting her status from chattel to property owner.
We've tracked it from the infinite quintar to the minimalist iron ring. We saw the intellectual depth of the jurists applying analogy to the penal code just to establish its non-trivial value.
But the global reality is, well, it's sobering. Mahr has either become an insurmountable status barrier in the Gulf, been tragically inverted into a demand for dowry in South Asia, or is judicially contested in every major Western court.
The journey confirms the robustness of the original legislation, but also the pervasive power of human culture to distort even the best of intentions. And the solution that contemporary scholars propose always circles back to the prophetic ethos. We have to return to the spirit of Nihlah, a willing gift proportionate to the means of the groom and the standard of simplicity.
As the prophet taught, the intention should be ease, not burden. The best Mahr is the easiest. Whether the substance of that divine right is a heap of gold, a contractually binding digital coin, or the selfless service of teaching a verse of the Quran, the Mahr is an inalienable right that must be upheld.
Which really raises an important question for you, the listener, to consider. If Mahr is a divine right designed for simplicity and financial empowerment, how can modern Muslim communities globally realign cultural expectations, which so often prioritize status and extravagance, with the authentic prophetic simplicity to ensure this financial right fulfills its intended goal, without becoming a debt or a barrier? It's a challenge that requires both religious conviction and profound social courage.
A truly profound thought to end on. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Mahr, the obligatory dower.
Jazakallah khair. May Allah reward you with goodness for spending your valuable time listening to us.